Welcome to an interview episode of the podcast Cannabis Last Week, brought to you by Global Cannabis Times. I am your host, as always, John Puro. I need to give my standard disclaimer. When I'm not fighting crime by night as a masked vigilante, I practice cannabis and or intellectual property law at the law firm Zuber Lawler. So any views that I state are those, not those of my law firm. For example, if I was to say that the Grateful Dead are fucking awesome band, leaning into the fucking awesome band, that would be my own view and not that of Zuber Lawler. So this interview podcast is going to be on the audio on all the major platforms as always, and it's also going to be on video. So I'd like to welcome my guest, Howard Glynn, who's Director of Investor Relations and a partner at Merida Capital Holdings. And not that I'm biased or anything, but Howard and I are both extremely good looking, in the words of Zoolander. So I encourage you to check out the video version of the podcast on YouTube. Howard, pleasure to have you. Let me note that Merida Capital Holdings is, a leading private equity fund that has investments in the cannabis industry. So thank you for joining.
Oh, it's my pleasure. This is fantastic, Jonathan. I'm so happy that we are finally doing this.
Yes.
After a few months.
Yes, and after some technical difficulty setting it up on
that as well.
We made it work, right? And just for the record, this is not my standard background because I'm on a southern, Airbnb road trip with a pit stop of my mother-in-law's. So if you hear my daughters in the background or my mother-in-law or my dog, we're just going to roll with it.
So, that's cool that I got my dog back here as well. So
exactly,
you know what it's like, work from home.
Yeah, exactly. I forgot. Typically, when I moderate panels virtually, or I do my prayer to the video chat gods, I should do it here, right? May our Wi-Fi connections be sturdy, right? May our dogs and children be quiet, and may Amazon Prime another time. All right, amen. So, look, very happy to have you on, right? Merida is a very established entity in the cannabis industry. I'm on LinkedIn. I see Minna, posting about your investments. Obviously, we're also connected. So there's one particular investment I think we discussed might be interesting to discuss was Jerome Baker Designs. So perhaps actually makes sense for you to give a little bit of a background in that particular one, if you'd like.
Well, Jerome Baker, the one thing that we love about Jerome Baker, let's go to that, is that he's authentic, or they're authentic. As you know, or may not know, Jason Harris, who founded Jerome Baker, was part of the very famous 2003 sting, paraphernalia sting, that the feds operation, I forget what it's called, where Tommy Chong was arrested as well. He was part of that whole paraphernalia sting. So back in 2003, he basically lost his whole company and, picked up, moved to Hawaii and started all over again. Anything that he had.
And we should note that they're glassware, right? That they are maker of, right? Fine.
I'm not even giving the background. They are the preeminent, if I might say so, glass design. I happen to have one right here that I have my prop. Yeah, they do beautiful work.
That's I'm having major flashbacks to college right there, right? So that's like the glassware that as you smoke, like the kind of color fills out in the bottom and gets smoky.
It's beautiful. It's beautiful. I mean, really. And so he became famous initially, and the Grateful Dead lot was selling his wares before and after shows. And what he would do was, and I'm not sure the year that he started doing it exactly, but he would take the bowls, and they were made out of pyrite, and he would throw them in the air and have them fall on the ground. And everybody would walk by and see these, bowls and bongs, whatever, not breaking. And next thing you know, there's lines down the lot, Shakedown Street, as they call it.
Yep.
And became famous for that. And he became better and better, as you know. He apprenticed under a gentleman named Bob Snodgrass, who was a famous glassblower. Mm-hmm. And, one thing led to another. And they are, as we like to say, the authentic. Let's just say you have everything. You go into a head shop and there's hundreds of bongs, and they're all somewhat modeled after what he had done. And not only is that, obviously a tribute to what he does, but his authenticity, being part of a whole sting operation, if you will, gives him something that the world of some of the cannabis users would like to cling to.
It's a little bit of cred, right? I mean,
Yeah,
essentially,
sure.
like, they
He's
bore the
street cred.
brunt of this,
Yeah, yeah, for
BS
sure,
war,
for sure.
on marijuana. So actually, I have a couple questions about that because this is,
Okay.
conjuring up all sorts of nostalgia for me. I mean, out of curiosity, if were they one of the first to use like the super strong pyrite like that? Or
Yeah, I think so. I really believe so. There might have been others doing it, but
yeah,
it's the pyrite they use. So I mean, you can't just like take one of these and throw them up in the air and not break. They typically have, they're a breaking level. I don't know
yeah,
what the technical term for that is, but yes, it is. And the factories, they have 10, 12, whatever inside the factory right now in Las Vegas, of glass blowers, master glass blowers making these designs, and they make it for all the celebrities and athletes and others in the world as well. So there are people who have their bakers, they're just so proud of them, and it's they're collector's items as well, and they hold their value.
yeah. No, it's great. And it's funny that you mentioned about that as like being part of the sales pitch at the Dead concerts, because, I'm
Yeah,
having that flashback of being in the head shop, 20 years ago.
right,
Right. And the
right.
guy behind the counter, like taking this like really nice thing. I'm like, oh, let me look at that one. And just going wham. And I'm like, oh, in that instant, and then breaking, I'm like, oh,
Sure.
right.
Yeah, I mean yeah,
That's
that's
a
appealing.
selling
Think
point for
about it.
them.
Yeah, for
Right.
sure,
Because they have the
for
beauty,
sure.
and then they can be, relatively, sturdy to an extent that the stuff that you're going to buy
It,
that's coming in from China is just not going
of
to
course,
compare with,
right. Of
you know.
course, of course. I mean, of course, the aesthetic value is something that few have, and what people want. Look, people are collectors. Let's be honest. They like to collect or whatever it might be.
Yeah.
Right.
And
Vinyl, bongs.
right. Yes. And some people might collect both,
Right.
right?
Exactly.
Plays into a certain demographic.
Exactly.
So
Exactly.
with
So
Merida's investment, it's like expanding operations and reach.
Merida, yeah, absolutely. Look, Merida is helping them expand operations, exactly. Expand their reach into, our ecosystem. And that's basically how we invest. And we invest in companies that work within our ecosystem. So that is obviously something that can help him and can help us. So
Got
help
it.
them. And JBD, just so we know, Jerome Baker, if you haven't said, well, you haven't. So Jerome, obviously for Jerome Garcia. Baker, you do the math,
Got
and
it.
design. So there it is. That's what JBD is.
Okay. And
There
I
it
mean,
is.
I find it interesting in the sense that, this is, as you said, a known entity going back decades, right?
It is. Yeah,
We
it is.
have this, the cannabis industry right now is this pretty unique, kind of melting pot of different brands and entities, where you have
Yeah,
these old school ones, and you already referenced Tommy Chong, right? So
right.
you're talking about a celebrity that has a long-standing, multi-decade old association with cannabis. So he hopped into the ring with his own brand. And you have, Jerome Baker. We now have Jerry Garcia, right?
Right.
Like, finally that has kind of entered. And then you have all
Yeah.
these new school celebrities, that I cover in the podcast. I do call them the celebrity cameos. And it's like, who's jumping in this week? Right. So you
Right.
have
You're right. You're right.
Justin Bieber, his song Peaches, right, has a reference to, weed from California, and now he's got his brand, right? And so
Oh,
I find it interesting, everyone is talking about, and obviously also I'm a trademark lawyer, so I'm a geek for this kind of stuff when it comes to brands,
interesting.
right? How you have, how these brands are trying to cross over, right? When you have an industry that's unique, is that you're not crossing state lines, right? How do you expand your brands, nationwide? And the thing about, celebrities is they can have nationwide followings, and
Right.
for something that's related to the dead, you have, first of all, this loyalty, right? This hardcore loyalty when it comes, to the dead or anything associated with them, but you have an old association, a strong association, and a nationwide association. And
Absolutely.
I mean, talking about that dead loyalty, I think now is the point in the podcast where we're just going to confess that this has been a complete bait and switch, right? Jerome Baker Designs, look, we put some goodwill out there for Merida and everything, and JBD, but this was all about getting to talk about the dead, right?
Yeah, let's do that.
You like the seg about, the loyalty, right? Howard
Yeah,
was like,
sure.
you know what? I'm only coming on this thing if we're talking about the dead, right?
Right.
That's what we're getting
Right.
to. And what this came out of was that Howard and I met at MJ BizCon when I was riding the wave, as I like to say, right? This was my first one before I got there. I'm like, oh, I'm going to schedule meetings back to back to back, like a trademark attorney conference. And then I just realized when there's like a little bit of resistance to this, I got there. I'm like, nope, that's not how this works.
Not going to happen.
Ride and you and I, wave, right?
You and I sitting at the bar, and you come up to me, start the whole networking spiel. I said, not today.
One of the 5 highlights actually of our MJ BizCon for me was the look that you, like, as you handed over your card, right? The begrudging look on your face. You're like, all right, you got this. All right. But it's only if we're talking about the debt. Right. It was a conditional, card handover, which, I'm a simple man. That's the type of thing that I find hysterical. So I appreciated that, and now that's why we're kind of making it happen. So to give a little bit more context about it, right, I'm not sure how it came up in the conversation. And I also got to hit you up at some point and talk to you how cool it was when I realized that your friend there was a former Major League Baseball pitcher. We'll talk about that offline because I'm a baseball nut too. So the context was that I had never really listened to the Dead pre-pandemic. And on a flyer, I got a text, I'd moved recently, a text from a guy down the block who said, hey, I have a ticket that just opened up to see J-Rad, which is Joe Russo's Almost Dead, a Dead tribute band focused on Joe Russo, who's the drummer. You don't see a lot of, drummer focused bands where they're not even, I don't think he really sings, right? Maybe like backup.
No, right? Very infrequently. Very infrequently.
Yeah.
Harmonies.
Yeah. So we had this little, little window pre-Omicron. I was fully vaccinated. I'm like, yeah, I'll go to this, right? It was the first time I've gone to a concert in a year and a half. And I walked in and without being familiar with, I'm a big music person. And I walked in not being familiar with the music, which I think is like, it makes it almost a pure experience, right? You're not like, oh, are they going to play my favorite? Are they not? It's just, I had a drink or two. I was a nice, spot. And I just enjoyed the music, standing there. And also it was the only time where I got there and I was like, who's the drummer? Right now, they did have him positioned in the center. I don't think they had they didn't have a specific like spotlight on him.
No, he is in the center. Correct.
Right. He was in the center. And I'm like, all right, who's that guy? Right. Because we have a friend of my wife's who's really, really good drummer. He plays with Andrew Bird and jazz and everything. And it's like, when you see these really good drummers, it's like they're a chef, right? It's like they're like a chef, like throwing in these ingredients. And a drummer in a jazz band, he was kind of imparting that. So I had this almost like religious experience, was digging the music. They were all so talented as musicians. And I was just riding this amazing vibe. I got out of that concert. I was listening to Dead nonstop. My wife was very tolerant because she's not as much of a music person as I am. And, still riding that good vibe and riding the MJ BizCon wave. Howard and I met, right? And Howard, I mean, please tell me about, your experience, because you got more experience when it comes to the Dead than I do.
It's just age. It's just age. My first live experience was in 1987. Before that, like any Northeast Jew, I went to camp. Let's just throw it in there. The camp experience, the summer camp experience, where all the older counselors were listening to the Grateful Dead. Older sisters, not as much, but definitely had been listening to them for years, but had never gone to see them. Went to college down south in New Orleans, but not really a hotbed for touring bands. As you know, New Orleans is its own island. And finally, my sophomore year, I was able to get out. And actually, let me tell you this: I went home for Passover break. That's what it was. Went over for Passover break. Didn't spend Passover. Spent 3 nights at the Spectrum in Philly, and that was the beginning of my experience. And I actually saw them on and off probably until 1993.
That's when he passed, right?
No, he'd passed in 95. I stopped in
okay, got it.
In 1993, with my last shows in April up here in New York at the Nassau Coliseum. Some really good shows as well. I have to say that I find, at least my experience of seeing them, of a real resurgence of the Grateful Dead after Jerry's diabetic coma and relearning everything he had learned and played in the past. And it was just an amazing time to see them. You know, I guess I was what would they call a touch head. Touch of Grey came out, and a lot of new fans had come in. I was a fan, but I hadn't seen a lot of shows. So, I mean, the old guard probably didn't take so kindly to us as all of a sudden, you know, you
Yeah,
couldn't
yeah.
get a ticket.
Who are these guys? Yeah.
Or you couldn't get a ticket to a show. I mean, top 10 album. Next thing you know, shows are selling out everywhere. But it was a great time to be alive and a great time to see the Grateful Dead for sure. I mean, 1989. I challenge anyone. I have this conversation with a friend of mine a lot. They're like, I won't listen to anything except from 1973 to 1977. And I'm like, man, 1989, there was just something so special about them. Jerry was healthy. The band was firing all cylinders. They sounded, looked great. And it was just a great time to be on the road and going to see them wherever you could. Really.
So you got to educate me a little bit, right? Because I am new to the party. So a couple questions. When was Jerry Garcia's diabetic coma? And when we said someone passed in 93 or 95, we were referring to Jerry Garcia.
1986.
1986.
Yeah.
Okay. And when did Touch of Grey, which is the song that I'm absolutely obsessed with of the Dead's? I mean, Althea, I'm super into. So that was a later one. Okay.
1987 was the album that came out. That being said, they've been playing a lot of the songs on that album since I would say since like 82, 83. Okay. Touch of Grey, a lot of the songs had been part of their lexicon, and they used those songs and they reworked them a little bit, not so much, but in 1987 they released the album. It was the first top 10 album for them. They had exposure on MTV, and people who had never seen them or heard of them or whatever, you know, got into it.
All right. So this is something I find interesting, right?
Okay.
So like a big bit of news this year are all like this older generation of artists now who are selling their catalogs and all races for titanic amounts of money. And so, you know, Bruce Springsteen, I think they just purchased for $500 million.
Right.
And it's like, you know, the music industry is like fascinating to track. I was almost went down the entertainment law road a little bit. And, you know, it was like, there's the dark ages of rampant piracy, right? And then, you know, the people like to amass titanic collections of pirated music. And then, you know, convenience ultimately, right? Convenience is how Amazon won. Convenience is how streaming services like Spotify won. And so now money's actually being made on these catalogs again. That, you know, tons of money are being thrown out. So I find it interesting and fun to go on Spotify, right, and search for these different classic rock artists and see how many plays they get, right? Some of their biggest, you know, they show you the top 5 and they show you how many times they've been streamed. So I was like, I've been obsessed with the Grateful Dead in this period. And then the Beatles Get Back came out, which I've been, I've rewatched the scene where Paul McCartney comes up with Get Back, right, out of like thin air, probably
stunning, right?
So cool to see like the creative process.
Just amazing.
Such an amazing classic song, you know, like just happen. And so what I found interesting when I do this little, you know, Spotify searching was, you know, the Beatles songs, you'll have the top 5, a couple 100 million plays each. Led Zeppelin, right? A couple 100 million plays each. And all of that, you know, Doors, lesser extent. And then I searched for the Grateful Dead, and their top songs are only played about 70 million times by comparison to these other guys. And I find that fascinating because I kind of feel like because they're a jam band, and I never checked Fish 2, which I should do, because they're a jam band, people are, it's like almost like their offerings are diversified. Because people are listening to live albums, right?
That's exactly what it was. That's what it is. It's once you hear that album, then you say, "Oh my God, there's 3,000 different versions of that song."
Yeah. Oh my God!
Sign me up.
Right.
You know? So you know, why listen to a studio recording only when you have all these offerings out there and then you have other bands playing their songs. That's always fun as well. That's anything, but. Look, Robert Hunter Garcia, Jerry's co-writer, he wrote all the lyrics, Jerry made all the music, did sell his catalog as well.
Oh, he did.
Right
Okay.
before he passed. Not a few years before he passed. He passed a couple of years ago, and about 2 years before that, he did sell his catalog, and he just wanted to take care of his family. It wasn't a big number.
Yeah.
It's not a, but if you think about it, the lyrics are just so Americana. They're just so ingrained into what we are as basically as a country, as society, and more so to me than someone like Bruce Springsteen, who, by the way, I love. Don't get me wrong, but I mean, just the lyrics and the songs and the stories that Hunter and Garcia wrote, to me are more worthwhile than a song about, well, Bruce, I could get it. I get it. He's got that American, the dream and growing up in, the working class America.
I think that there's I think there's a different vibe, and I think you touched upon it, right? I think that Springsteen, who I've never hugely gotten into. I mean, it was all like, I inherited some of the musical taste from my, my older brothers, and his, I think, is kind of like the shifting of America, the decline of the blue collar worker is like kind of a focus. And I think that one of the things that, struck me in seeing J-Rad, and it was the energy, right? I think you keyed upon it. I think it comes out of the lyrics, but, I got there and this concert was cross-generational, right? Oh, yeah. It's like, I ask myself all the time, how many of these classic rock artists, I mean, they're dropping all these money on them. How many of them are going to really continue on when the generations of listeners, aren't around as much, right? Who's going to cross over to these other generations? And I find it, well, first off, I found it very, very, I guess, disturbing the first time that I was listening to a classic rock station and, Nirvana Nevermind, which I grew up with, came on, and I see all these kids wearing Nirvana shirts. And frankly, I think it's because he offed himself. Right. And I think that I'll be honest with you, right, those teenage years when you think you're invincible and there's angst and everything, right? Someone like that becomes iconic because he's preserved in time, and he's not out there, traveling and performing until he's 60 or 70 or anything like that. And they don't necessarily sound the same. But, I was struck by the cross-generational audience watching J-Rad, and that's, really kind of heartening. And I think that comes out of the energy, right? And speaking of, positive energy, when you need it more than anything, it's during the pandemic. But I think that there's something completely unique, and tying things back around, there's something about that energy that I think connects it to cannabis, right? I think that there's built into, when it comes to cannabis, concepts of sharing the good energy, right? It's the whole, puff, puff, pass, right? No one, bogarts anything. Well, outside of lighters, right?
Don't bogart that joint.
Right? Don't bogart that joint. And outside of lighters disappearing, it's like the one thing.
Or vape pens.
Yes.
Which has happened.
Yeah, I didn't realize I have some clients that they're lighter leashes to go against this, right? You actually you put the lighter in a leash.
I like it.
To your belt or something to prevent that from happening. But there's something, I kind of feel like, tying it back together. There's something about, that energy of the Grateful Dead that is connected to cannabis, or is, however it is, it's like, it's a related type of energy, which is
without a doubt it goes hand in hand,
right? And obviously, psychedelics we haven't even touched upon, and there's a lot of exciting movement with respect to that. And look, with cannabis and psychedelics, I think at this point the evidence of their medicinal benefits in all sorts of ways is proven. And we're getting into more specific pharmaceutical grade type of deployments of these things. But there's something about that energy and connectedness that you feel at a Grateful Dead concert that's similar to when you're, partaking in these, some of these substances, and like a shared experience with that.
Absolutely. The communal aspect of it is unparalleled. And, this is what goes back to 87 for me, going to a show and having that experience made me a lifelong fan, obviously, but it also made me a lifelong fan of all shared musical experiences. And you touched on Fish,
Yep.
obviously, and all the jam bands. So, I mean, there's nothing like it. No two shows are alike. You can miss what was the greatest show ever, but the next night catch another one that was the greatest show ever. But
Yeah, right.
there's nothing like that. Where else can you do that? Bieber. You're going to go see a 3-night run of Justin Bieber? He's going to do this. He's going to do the same thing every night.
Yeah, the improvisational element, right?
Yeah,
every time you see them is something new.
That being said, Justin Bieber hired Chris Kuroda, who was Fish's lighting director for one of his most recent tours. And look, he, there's some aspects of the jam bands that all bands have taken, and we can get into that in our next series. Listen, not on purpose, but they wrote the book on touring and on fan engagement and everything that they did. They've created a whole cottage industry in the music business, and it was all because of them and what they did. Forget about the music and their playing and whatever, but what they did as a business obviously has crossed over to next generations.
Yeah, and you actually touched upon something that I learned that was really interesting about them, right? Whereas other bands would try to crack down on piracy, right, and recordings at their concerts, they zagged where everyone else zigged, right?
Yeah.
And they might not have sold as many albums because people were spreading
Absolutely
these bootlegs of the concerts, but it made their concerts like a movement, right? Like you said.
Last laugh right now. Look who's still around, right? Look, as Jerry used to say, when we're done with it. That's what he would say about the music, and that's why they didn't care. He said, when we're done, you guys do what you want with that music. They never cracked down on piracy.
And should I have asked you, by the way, is this, I think to some extent, this is a badge of honor for certain people. Should I have asked you how many concerts by the Dead or tribute bands? No, you don't say it. I want to know, I don't know the proper courtesy.
The Dead for me wasn't as much as you would think, but was 35, which wasn't enough. But if we were to talk about the whole
tribute bands,
tribute bands, other jam bands, easily thousands without blinking, thousands.
Wow. All right. Yeah. Well, then I think that the way to close this out is to say, once all this crap is done with Omicron and everything, we got to go to a concert together, right?
We got J-Rad this summer. I mean, they announced some of the shows already. I think you need to get out and see them for multiple nights.
Yeah,
they're great. I don't find them a tribute band. You did say that before, but they make their own music.
Yeah,
based on the songbook. They also have a wonderful crowd with them, and always creating something new and fun. As a matter of fact, after I left Vegas, I went to see J-Rad in California.
Oh, really?
I drove the Friday night in LA at the Palladium. Fantastic show.
Yeah, see, that coincidence was how I got that card out of you.
Yep.
It's all right. So then that's I'm gonna hold you to that, right? We're gonna go check out one of these, concerts together.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely.
All right. So I think with that,
we'll take our Jerome with us, and we'll travel.
Oh, is that the name of the dog?
No.
Oh, okay.
We'll take our Baker with us.
Right. And, we'll have a carrier. You'll pretend it's a baby carrier, and instead it'll be the Jerome Baker. Okay. There we go. All right. So thank you so much for appearing once again, Howard Glynn from Merida Capital Holdings. And as always, I'll give my customary Will Ferrell sign off. Stay grassy, my buds, and I will see you next episode.